Hello. How are you? How are you all over the world, my African brothers and sisters? It's nice to meet, to see you again. We as we continue to study my book, Thank You, Mrs. G, which is on Amazon and other house websites. But of course, as I said last week, this book is being sold by other websites, and my aim really is for this book to be studied, even though it is like a rant or something like that. But then I really believe that this book can help young people, the next generation, in order for them to actually open our minds. I'll start this by saying why when you said ask me, oh, as most people do, colonization is a long time ago. I'll tell you a story about what happened just yesterday. I was talking to my youngest son, who's working for a big company, and he was telling me how he was thinking back to his times at school, his times because the black people were in the minority back in Ireland, uh, and he was telling me about this guy who used to bully him. This is something he's telling me for the first time at 23, and it happened when he was something like 14. It just makes you realize that parents, there's a lot of things that children are going through that are a result of this situation that we found ourselves in Africa, which are really just reverberating through the generations. And he told me that he used to, at lunchtime, he used to put his lunch in the lunch box. He discovered that, oh, when he have supper and he left a little bit of lunch, he put it in his lunch box, and he enjoyed doing that because when he went to school, when he's eating, he felt like, he was enjoying his lunch much more than buying from the school tuck shop or anything like that. But he said, this particular boy who, in the end, bullied him very badly, they would come and laugh at him, you know, and laugh at him for the rice and say chicken, the way they associate chicken with black people and all that stuff. And he was thinking, he said he stopped bringing his lunch. He stopped bringing his lunch, something that he enjoyed. He stopped doing it. He stopped doing it because there was another value. There was another set of rules that were put by just another child, simply because that child was white, simply because that child was the dominant group. My son, even at that young age, he actually submitted to what this boy wanted and stopped bringing his lunch. And of course, he was explaining to me that now that he's working and he's an adult, he will never dare to actually allow that to happen to him. And it was very, very inspiring for me because this is something that he learned. He never said it to anybody, but he thought about it when he was in this job, and he thought, I'm not going to. And I'll tell you, this is what colonization was about. Colonization was making your culture, your language, everything that you are seem inferior so that you can submit to the dominant group. And we know that the dominant group does not have to be the majority because in Africa, it was the minority. In my country, white people consisted of 8% of the population, but they dominated everything. I'll give you, for example, the education budget, 90% went to that 8%. So I start my book with the chapter that says, brainwashed from the womb, because I was brainwashed from the womb. Because from when I was born, I learned as what I saw from my fathers who were submitting. My father was called a boy, even when he was a leader of my family. Why? Because his culture, everything that he was considered less. And therefore, he was, every time he was pandering to white people, he wanted to please white people. He did everything to appease them. And I was born in that generation where I felt that. I believed it from the inside that a white person was better than me. And I lived it. And colonization is exactly that. It's a brainwashing of a group of people. And in our case, it's the whole of Africa. And there were things that were done that made us believe we're inferior in every way. So, how do you decolonize your mind? That's what I wanted to discuss today, because this book is really about the journey to, decolonizing my own mind, which I had to go on. And I believe that Africa needs two things. First of all, we need to know that our genes were altered. This whole traumatic experience altered our genes. You can ask me, do I know? Do we have proof? In 2015, a study was done on Holocaust survivors, and they found out that the children of the survivors of the Holocaust were actually had trauma in their genes, and yet they had never experienced that, the Holocaust itself. So then they realized that their genes were altered because so traumatic was this, event of the Holocaust, that it actually altered something in them, and the children they bore were actually, were born with that trauma. And of course, as always, these same studies are not being done with Black people, and yet we have experienced trauma through colonization, to enslavement, but it was just done but we can infer then that the same thing happened to us. So I believe if we get to the bottom of the epigenetics of of colonization, then we'll be able to decolonize our minds, which is the second thing that I think Africans need. You talk to a young person today, he will tell you that a white person is more superior than them. Why? Because they have always seen, they grew up seeing their parents, they grew up seeing the society, the television, and everything tells them that they're less. And therefore, they internalize their oppression, and they oppress themselves. They oppress themselves and others like them. So that is what's going on now. And I was going to touch on the subconscious mind because this book starts with me. The first chapter, I talk about how I found out. I went to a white school when my country was desegregated. I moved from a Black school to a white school, and I was the first student or the second in that whole school. And I found myself surrounded by white girls who I believed were superior to me. But as I say in my book, the English language, that they were speaking English as their first language. They spoke it from when they were born. And I struggled to speak their language. Even though I'd come from a school where I was top of the class in English, in the English language, I came there to become somebody who couldn't. I could not read. I was scared to read. They would make us read loudly, and I'll be frightened to read because I knew could not measure up to them when it comes to reading. So, of course, then I realized maths is my strong, subject. I realized, I was better than them with maths. I was better than them, But that still did not go away because the rooted inside of me was the fact that they were superior. In fact, my mother, who was, quite educated, had told me about this Simon Morton and had sort of, said so usually the more well read you were in Africa, the more you believed that you were less. It's a strange thing because even for myself, I never felt how black I was until independence came and I was able to go and mix with white people. That's when that's when I felt my inferiority more than anything, which is really ironic because before I was growing up as an innocent child who was happy with my plight. But then when I went to a white school, I was made to feel I was less. And I don't want to blame it on one particular person. But of course, the teachers that taught me had grown up and the 40s, 50s, they've grown up in this system where somebody like me, could not sit in their class. The people like me, they saw were people in their gardens. They were people who looked after their children. So for them as well, it was hard for them to accept me as capable. And of course, I talk about a few incidences that I had. When I was reading about the subconscious mind and how it works, I realized that there's a critical period in the development of a child, psychologically and biologically. And in this critical period, which is from, third semester in the womb to about 5, and this child really does not have an analytic mind. So it means that this child, they say, his brain waves are sort of like, the way, how you feel just before you fall asleep, slowing down, that theta brainwaves, which are quite slow. So what it means is that these children are very sensitive to any stimuli around them. This is the time when they, take up the language. This is the time they absorb your language mannerism. They really just are recording everything that happens so that they are able to later on join a community. They are actually learning. So they are taking in everything, good or bad. They don't know what's good. They don't know what's bad. Okay. So this particular it starts to close. They say in between 5 and puberty, then it starts to close. So I realized that for me, for Black people, when we went to school at 7, and white kids at that time, they went to school at 5 because the budget allowed it, right? So what it meant then is that before, for them, they are learning also. The other benefit, they were learning in the language that they first spoke when their first words were said in that language, and it's the same language they were educated in, as opposed to me from 7. That's when I went, and 7, that's when the critical period is starting to close down. So which means they believe that when a child is put with native people, wherever you are, okay, between 0 and 5, you can speak the language of those native people without an accent. You will speak it, because that becomes your language. So a lot of people would take children I remember actually when I was growing up, white people say, oh, I went to France, I went to, they're trying to make their children adopt all those languages. But of course, Black kids couldn't. So when I started school, I was already up against trying to think in English trying to speak in English when I'm thinking in Shona. And it meant that it was actually a struggle for me. Whereas for them, it was just cruising. If they were thinking in English, they were writing in English. So there was no complication. So already I started to see how this system was structured. and rigged against me. So I saw that. So then I started to open, as I was reading, I started to open my mind to realize that, okay, this colonization meant that we were just really running, after the white people in everything. Because when you think about it, the funding was against us, the culture itself. I'm trying to learn in a culture that is not my own, a language that is not my own, everything. So when you go home, you have a different culture. So that really was meant to propagate the narrative that we were less intelligent, because they knew that they had put a lot of stumbling blocks, in between me and the learning. So that when I'm learning and I'm slow to catch up on things, I just blame it on my IQ, my low IQ. So when I open my eyes to that, I just realized as well how important the subconscious mind is, how important what you absorb when you're growing up, the belief system. And of course, for most Black people in Africa, the belief system that we grew up in is the fact that you are inferior, less intelligent. Okay. So as I was listening to my son, as I said, I realized that, oh my God, this system, which we think is long gone, affected my children. Because this boy who was laughing at my son eating a meal that, he wouldn't eat, was saying to my son, what you eat is inferior. What you eat is unacceptable. What you eat. So he was learning that what his mom cooked at home was not really the standard. So he was being taught in that way to actually look down on everything that I ate and everything I cooked as an African woman. Of course, he didn't, because he obviously enjoyed my meals. But I'm just telling you how these beliefs actually seep into your children's minds, and slowly. And if they're watching the trachea, it's my son who's there. If they're watching the prime minister speaking, it's my son's color who's there. If they're watching this prime minister speaking, for those who are, in the West, they're seeing white people. If there's any important news about running the country, it's white people. So then, you ask me, how then does that affect, because in Africa there are televisions and everything. How it affects is the fact that every time we are choosing a leader, in my country, in Zimbabwe, every time we are choosing a leader, we are choosing a leader when they campaigning, like in my country, our president, when he was campaigning, he told people that Trump will give him money. The opposition, they campaigned, Trump will give him money. So their campaign was, we will get money from the West. It was not, we are going to create the ways to make money for ourselves. It was still a submission to the West. So the whole country then cheers and they're happy. Oh, they're going to get money from the West. In other words, we cannot create our own. So even though some of the leaders were fought the liberation struggle, their mind have not been decolonized. They are still looking to the West for help. They still believe in their inferiority. So that's why I believe that if we move away, if we start knowing who we are, stop self-oppressing, we will start to open our minds. So how do you open your mind? How do you think about, how do you open your mind? Question everything that you believe in. If you can sit down and every time you are reacting to something, question the root of it. Question everything that you are looking at. I've gone through the Christianity itself that they sold us. I've gone through and to find out how it started and all that stuff and see where it was, because everything was changed. So the life that you're living, the reason why you want to you believe that you are less is because of what has been going on, what we have, has been passed from generation to generation. So decolonize your mind then is really deconstructing everything that you believe. Everything that you believe you are. Break it down. Break it down. A lot of times I know that right now, a lot of people, and I'm not, knocking on the nurses, the the doctors and lawyers and everything, but you have to know that there's a certain time when certain professions were allowed to Black people for certain reasons. And there were certain professions that were out of bounds for us. So we have to question all that and go back to asking ourselves why we believe what we believe. And I really wanted to go into how we meditate and to deconstruct all that, your belief system and everything, and how you can go into meditation to actually get rid of the thinking that you have. From now on, we have to aim to decolonize our minds and how we, deconstruct everything that you've ever known. It is for a Black person, it is a fearful thing to actually go back and live the way you were meant to live. It's still a journey for a lot of us, but it's a journey we have to take, because we cannot keep hiding. We cannot be like chameleons wherever we are living, whatever country we are living. We are just imitating those people. We have to try and be ourselves so that we know how to behave wherever we are. I was thinking, the journey that our parents took to adopt and become and try and become this cultured people, white cultured Western cultures, was a difficult journey. But it was a journey that they took in order to survive. Now we have to take back our power because it was taken away from us. I don't care where you are, what you're doing, whatever job you're doing. If you are in a situation, I've been on TikTok and I've seen young people, especially Irish, who were fighting with people, I'm Irish, whether you like it or not. And this is a Black kid. Of course, they have the perfect Irish accent, which is brilliant. But these are people who are happy when a white person says, I don't see color. We have to question if somebody says they don't see color. So they want your color to disappear in order for you to feel, for them to feel comfortable. That is actually an insult. That is not a solution. These are people who be like, look, you have to like, whether you like it or not. I'm Irish. You are Irish, you're Afro. I said to one of them, you are Afro-Irish. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with adding. And these are people who are parents who are Africans, but they want to delete and just be called Irish. That's silly. African Americans fought for a long time to be called African Americans because they wanted their origin to be sounded every time someone looks at them. Because they knew that even if people don't say it, there is a question at the back of their mind. They can say they're American, but they are not. So they wanted that. And of course, we know that because of colonization, we called white Americans, we call them Americans. But then we know that they call the other ones are called, the Indians are called the Native Americans. So you can see that's part of colonization, that other people have a double barrel and they have that. They are just Americans. That's part of colonization. Telling you that you are not, you're less. But the truth about it is that we are not less if we're African Americans, African Irish, African British. I think Afro Caribbeans. I think when you start knowing who you want to represent everybody who comes from where you come from. Stop dodging and saying, I'm British or I'm Irish. If you're a young person, if you're telling people, oh, they're British, I can tell you something. No matter what they tell you, they don't look at you and say you're British. At the back of your mind, there's a question. I wonder where they originally came from. And when they ask us, where are you from? And then we say, oh, I'm Irish. And they say, no, where are you really from? And people get offended. That's not a bad question. Because originally we would never be here if it wasn't a colonization or slavery. So if somebody's asking, no, where are you really, really from? It should not be an offensive question. It should, Italians don't find that, offensive, French people don't find that offensive, but we just want to say, oh no, we don't ask me that question. And it's actually used, and unfortunately, some of the very respectable people, right, are offended by that question. But I don't think it's a bad question. I think we are Afro. My children, one was born, I think the rest of them were born as Zimbabwe, but my last two were born here. So one of them is British, African British. I'll say that. The other one is African Irish, Afro Irish. I don't know, however you want to. But at the end of the day, they are not just British or Irish. And I'm absolutely proud of that, because we actually complicate things. We complicate our decolonization, because when we are called Afro and we are referred to as Africans originally, perhaps this will motivate us to find out where we really come from. Because the history of the British, when they say their history, when they read their history, there's very little mention of us. And a lot of people, are really worried. I really believe that Obama, it's controversial. Some people don't know whether they like him, or not. But I believe what made him really become president, we were discussing it, me and my son yesterday, and I was saying this to him. Obama was raised by his white grandmother and his white grandfather, right? Of course, he lived with his mom for some time, but he really lived with white people. But when you see him, when he's talking, you can see he's a black man. And he made a decision. I read his book. He made a decision to go and live in Chicago. And in Chicago, he knew there were as many black people as possible. He wanted to learn about his roots. He wanted to learn about her. He wanted to learn. But of course, we know that his father was Kenyan. So perhaps he found out then that, okay, these people are Africans, but not as, not like my father. So of course, he made the journey to go to Kenya to see his parents, to see his father had died then. But he wanted to find out where he came from. And when he came back, I believe that when he came back, he had the pride of his roots. As you know, his grandfather was part of the Mau Mau who were tortured by the British. And of course, he came to find out that. And I believe most of the reason why this Mau Mau came, uprising, the torture, all the rapes and everything came out. I believe it was because Obama is Kenyan and he had to go and uproot all that. So he came back with power. He came back knowing who he was. And he went and married a black woman. And of course, they're a couple who knew who they were. And it is so important. I know we pray, but God made us come from the origins where we come from deliberately. He never said to Timothy, forget that you're Greek. In fact, Paul always spoke about it. The origin, where you come from, is part of you. As you sit down where you are, there is I always think about it, that when I'm sitting here, there is part of my father, part of my mother, part of my father and my mom grew up in two different countries. And I just feel that whole thing of all those people, I have the genes, I have little things of each one of them. And it's so powerful. It empowers me. It empowers me to think. When I think back, it empowers me. And that, of course, has been taken from most Africans. They don't know. But don't throw away all that just to become Irish, just for this life. There's beauty in being yourself. When you're sitting here, when I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, I think about my mom and my dad. My mom was a gentlewoman. My dad was, on the talkative side. And these two people from two different countries, they came together and had me. I can't ignore that. And my great-grandfather. And I think about myself, my grandchildren. I think about, one was, my two grandchildren were born in Ireland and one in Canada. And I think to myself, this is all rich. When they come to talk about who they are, there's the richness in that. Don't ignore that because you are in the West. You want to belong to a group of people in your work or in your school. Don't throw away all that. Have pride in that. We talk about, these the World War II veterans and the pride that people have. And Captain Tom, who died, recently, who raised money for the NHS. And he talks about the war and everything. Every year they tell us about the war, how they won the war, and you were just there. It's only now they realize Africans were part of it. But look, you don't have to rob yourself of all those things just to belong for a short while. Your life is worth a lot more with all that riches, those riches of where you come from. I can tell you. Wherever you are in work, you're bringing all that into that job. No one else has all those little bits that you have. So you need to stand tall and be proud of your work. Don't belittle yourself. Don't pretend to be white, and British and Irish. Don't pretend. There's a lot more that you can bring on the table. If you're trying to bring what an Irish person brings, you are not bringing anything different to the table if you're in a boardroom. I just saying to, with that, I say next week I will be telling you how to, sort of go into your subconscious and decolonize your mind, and change what you think, change who what's in your subconscious, which is what controls you, which is 95%. Go in there and rip out all the, dismantle all the lies so that you can rise up again. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this week. We'll see you next week. God bless. Bye.